This story still haunts me. I work as the County Historic Preservation in Southern Appalachia. I'm working on buildings and properties that the county owns. One of the benefits, including in my job, is living on site in one of the historical properties. The historic house was an imposing brick mansion. It was built back in 1810. I lived in a small caretaker's house about 20 feet away. This was in the backwoods, and to deter trespassing and vandalism, the county built an 8-foot-tall fence around the entire 5 acres and put barbed wire around the top of the fence. I mention this to show basically how impossible for anyone to get back in there, either to jump or climb over the fence. One night, after working late at another property, I pulled up to the entrance gate and I let myself in. I locked it behind me and I drove about 100 yards down this gravel road to my house. There's no lights on the property, so all I could see was my headlight. As I turned my car around the corner of one of the outbuildings and I parked it, my light shone on this thing. I still have a hard time describing it effectively. It is around the size of a deer, but with long spindly legs and also long shaggy hair. It almost looked like a taller maned wolf, if you've ever seen a picture of one of those. That alone shook me, because there's no way something that size should have been able to get through the fence. What follows is absolutely true. I got out of my car to get a better look, to see what the hell this thing was. As I opened the door to get out, the thing took off, running away. Not on 4 legs, but on 2. I literally watched this thing raise its back up. It stood its full height, right on its back legs, and it sprinted away. I was absolutely freaked out at this point, and I grabbed my mag light and my shotgun. I tried my best to find this thing. Mind you, this was just 5 acres, and I found no trace of this thing. There was no tracks or anything. I have no idea how it got in or out of the property. I didn't sleep at all that night. I just sat on my couch with my shotgun, watching the front door, hoping that whatever I saw didn't come back and burst in. I can't explain what the hell I saw, but it still raises the hairs on the back of my neck every time I think about it. We were wrapping up for the day in northern Canada. I was fueling up a side boom, and I was all by myself at this point, because I was tired of listening to the laborers whining about how cold it was, so I told them that I would take care of the rest. Think bulldozer with no blade, with a giant metal boom on the side, used to raise or lower pipe. This was in February, and it was pitch black. I kept hearing some weird sounds. I couldn't quite hear it, because the pump was way too loud. I searched around a couple of times and I saw nothing. Finally, after it was over, I get into my truck and I take off. I drive past the front of the side boom and I see a cougar sitting on top of a pile of dirt. It was only 15 feet away. This damn thing had just been watching me and probably could have ended me without me even realizing it. If you've never seen a cougar before in the wild, it's kind of hard to understand just how big they are and how powerful they are until you see one up close. That thing leaped off a 6-foot pile and probably didn't touch the ground for another 15 or 20 feet. It's terrifying to think that something so big and powerful could just be sitting there, deciding whether to make you its dinner or not. My mom and I used to live in a small town in the Cascade Mountains, and she worked as a forest ranger. The creepiest thing that ever happened to her was that one of the oldest male rangers kept hitting on her, trying to get her to come home with him. It's not very out of the ordinary, but many years later, after she left the town, she found out that he had been convicted of manslaughter, and he had killed a younger female ranger right before she got hired. She could have probably been his next target. I spent a summer doing conservation work out in the middle of absolutely nowhere in Wyoming. I was part of a crew. We would spend 2 weeks camping in remote places, doing manual labor in places machines can't go. For this story, we were building a new hiking, biking trail in the back portion of this designated wilderness area. This means that the nearest civilization was like a 2-hour car ride to a town of like 41 people. It was in the middle of our stint, during the early part of the night, where everyone had gone to bed. But I stayed up to read, so maybe 11:30 or so. It's pitch black outside. Clouds have covered the stars, so my headlamp was probably the only light in a 40-mile radius. I suddenly hear footsteps, walking around our camp, and it heads toward the tents, from where I was to the community tent. The sound immediately put me on edge. I felt the hairs on my arms raise and my adrenaline spike. I recall thinking to myself that two things are very wrong, since the person was not using a light and the footsteps were not coming toward me from the tents. Rather, it was the opposite. Within the 4 seconds it took me to drop my book and get up, I turned the corner of the tent and cast my light on the sleeping tents. The sound had stopped, but I saw the tracks in the dirt before me. Looked like they come from one end of the camp, looked into my tent, walked through the sleeping tents, and kept going out of the camp again. I don't know if I was making too much noise, but the rest of the crew ended up waking up and asking me what was going on outside their tents. After explaining what I found, they all got up to look at the boot prints in the dirt. They were damn near perfect copies of my own boots, except for one small thing. He had a rock stuck in his treads. It messed up the symmetry. I wear fairly common work boots, except I happen to wear a US size 15 double wide boot. So there's no way in hell this was one of the other crew members. I don't think any of us slept that night. I never saw or heard anything more after that night. A light rain removed the tracks a couple of days later, but I do remember none of us were willing to step on the prints. We chose to step over them, like cracks in the sidewalk. I used to own a horse boarding and training farm. It was about 45 acres surrounded by woods. I used to spend the night there quite a bit, because I had to start my chores early in the morning, so if I stayed up late, it wasn't worth me driving home. One night, around midnight, my dog started to bristle up, and he was growling at the door. Then my iPod, which I kept on the speaker in the middle of the barn, started blasting out Johnny Cash's Ring of Fire at full volume, which I definitely hadn't left on. Let me tell you, that song is really freaky in the middle of the night. My dog was full on growling and barking at the door, so I cracked it and I let him run out. Figured that if someone was out there or around the barn, that he would get them. Anyone out there anyway would have been trespassing at that time of night. After a few minutes, I went out of the office into the barn. Now I carried a bat with me. I turned off the creepy music. The light that I usually kept on, so I could see around, it was turned off. So it was pitch dark in most of the barn. My dog was just staring at the barn door, which I kept open in the summer. His hairs were bristling, but he wasn't leaving the barn, which he was allowed to do. I wrote it off as creepy, but ultimately, just one of those things, like it's weird and I can't explain it, but there's got to be an explanation that I'm not privy to. But really the scary part, that my property shared a private gate with the back of the property that was closest to mine, which had a gate at the back. Most of my property was fenced because of the horses, and the property next to mine had dozens of acres fenced in with chain link fence, which if you know anything about rural fencing is not done. Anyway, we found out later that the owner of that property was Todd Colip, the South Carolina serial killer. He would have women chained up like dogs on his property, and he and his friends would rape and walk them around on the property on a leash. He also had some of the bodies of the people he killed buried on his property. He was doing all that stuff while I was living next to him. In fact, I used to ride on his property, but I would always turn around when I heard machinery. In retrospect, he was probably burying bodies. I was probably only one of few, besides his friends that were raping women, that went onto his property while this was going on. I worked at an oil refinery for a while. Everyone told me a story about this guy who would eat chips while taking a crap. I'm pretty skeptical by nature, coupling with the general level of screwing around that my peers would do. I figured it was just a myth. Well, one night, I'm working my 10th 12-hour shift. I did this in a row, so I had more than a few cups of coffee, and I found myself in a dire need to take a dump. So I head to the old mobile crap trailer. It was like a 30-foot double-wide trailer full of urinals and stalls. So there I am, with my pants and overalls at my ankles. I had my phone in my hand, minding my own business, when I hear the door creak open, and some shuffling of feet, the rustling of coveralls, and someone pops into the stall next to me. At this point, I'm already thinking this dude's kind of weird. There's like 30 stalls, and he went to the one next to mine, but the weird level got turned up to 11 when I start hearing the telltale signs of a rustling of a chip bag. My brain instantly recalls the story of the chip crapper. I listened in disbelief. He rips open the bag of munchies and he digs in. The sounds of that monster munching down on potato chips and also unloading can only be described as a crime against humanity. It still haunts my nightmares to this day. I worked at a night shift at a prison for years. The one thing that really creeps me out is when a hit is put out for someone in the middle of the night. The inmates' code says that they keep it as quiet as possible. No one says a word. The only thing that you hear is grunts and moans from the victims. Then it goes and stays silent. If you hear it happening, it's already too late to stop it. It'll be over before you can pull out the keys. Occasionally, if someone needs medical attention, the first sign that we would get is the inmate approaching the bars, saying that he needs to go to medical, and they're usually bleeding all nonchalant. The creepy ones is when no one shows up, and all you get is grunts of pain, and that's it. I do mineral exploration in Alaska. I'm often transported by helicopter to some very remote regions throughout the area. Very remote. A few years ago, my field partner and I came across what seemed like a bear kill of a caribou carcass, but when we got closer to it, it seemed very odd. The only things remaining were 2 spines and 1 head. The head was arranged in such a way that the mouth was wide open, pointing up like it was screaming toward the heavens, and its eyes were cut out. It was very weird. There's also been instances where we come across old miner buildings littered with dog skeletons and having very strangely new children's clothing just strewn all about. I'm a geophysicist, and I'm out doing surveys about 1/3 of the time. A lot of our surveys are in remote locations. I was doing this one in my home province of Saskatchewan, very far north. It's about a 6-hour drive from the near small town, and it's about a 45-minute helicopter ride before you get to camp. It's isolated. And this survey began in October, so it was quite dark a lot of the time. My room was on the attic of our only building, and the wood-burning stove that heated the place was directly below my room, so I would often leave the window open at night. One night, I had the window open, and I can hear this singing from the outside, which was really creepy, but I figured it was one of the members of the crew who couldn't sleep. The next night I hear the same thing. It was around the same time, around 3 a.m., and this time I got up. I went to go to the restroom. Everyone else was sleeping in their cots in the large open room, and when I was heading back to my room, I realized that everyone was in their cots. I didn't hear it again for a few days, and it stopped creeping me out. Until about a week later, I wake up and I hear it again. I go to check once again, and everyone's in their cots. I put on my huge winter jacket, and I head outside, and I walk towards the sound. I step right up to the shore of the lake, where I hear it coming from somewhere across the lake. The moon is up, and it's very bright. I see someone in the lake, which was absolutely freezing, as in it was starting to ice over. At this point, I was terrified, but I called out just in case they needed help. They dived down underwater, and I didn't see them ever again, or hear the singing. It felt like a dream, but I was wide awake. I used to work at this summer camp. Usually the kids would go to bed around 9 p.m., so the rest of us would just hang out around the fire. One night, one of the kids came to the fire pit, which was about 100 yards from the cabin, saying that she was having trouble sleeping because of the noise. So I walk her back to make sure everything was good in the cabin. And I come back and I tell everyone to keep it down. Maybe 10 minutes later, she comes back. She says that she still can't fall asleep. I walk back with her again, and in my head I'm thinking that she's just restless because we weren't being that loud. But anyways, I make sure that she's under the covers, and I head back to the fire pit. Just as I'm about to get there, I realize that I left my walkie-talkie with her in the room. So I head back, and she's sitting upright in bed with the walkie-talkie in her hand. I'm thinking, okay, whatever. I tell her to go to sleep. I head back to the fire pit, and the guys were like, "Why did you say that to her?" And I'm like, "What do you mean?" And they're like, "We heard you on the walkie-talkie. You look good with your head shaved. All little girls look better with their head shaved." I told them that I never said that, but no one believed me. It was obviously not her saying it either, because it was a grown man's voice. I rushed back to check on the cabin, but everything was normal. I've seen a few things working in remote locations, on land and working on oil rigs and platforms in the Gulf of Mexico. But I definitely think the eeriest one, I never saw it myself, but I've heard countless stories from people who investigated it. On a platform offshore, a man went missing during his nightly rounds. After searching the platform top to bottom, they found his hard hat, his tool belt, his work boots, and all of his personal stuff, neatly placed on the grating near the rails, and he was missing in action. Everyone has their stories that maybe it was just suicide. And it turns out living on a metal structure surrounded by water for weeks on end takes its toll on you. Some people have their theories that he found out that his wife was cheating on him. Some people even think it was nefarious, like someone made him do it because they found him having an affair with their wife. The oil field can be a dark place, both mentally and physically. All I know is jumping into the dark abyss of the ocean and letting the waves swallow you up is a terrifying concept to me. Now my story happened along a dead stretch of highway around 3 in the morning. I was making the drive back home from the docks, and around 3 a.m. I started getting so exhausted it was getting unsafe for me to drive. I was falling asleep and I was slapping myself in the face, sticking my head out the window and trying to do anything to keep myself awake. But nothing was working. So due to the time and location, there wasn't any safe place that I could park and get a little bit of rest. I was in such a sleep-deprived state that I figured that since I hadn't seen anyone on the highway, I'd just pull off to the side of the road and get some rest. I left my truck running with the lights on, and I set an alarm for 45 minutes. Well, on that truck, when you put it in park, it automatically unlocks the doors. Thank God for me, before I fell asleep, I had the presence of mind to relock all the doors, because 10 minutes before the alarm went off, I woke up to the sound of my door handles on the rear passenger door getting violently yanked repeatedly, shaking the whole truck. Needless to say, I was awake now and full of energy. All I can remember from the adrenaline dump was that I slammed the truck into gear and probably did the best burnout that my truck has ever done, throwing rocks and smoke at whoever was behind me. The rest of the drive home, I remember swerving left to right, making sure if there's anyone in the bed of my truck, that I'd knock them out. I think the creepiest thing about the whole ordeal was that there was no way that I could prove that it happened. At the time of the incident, I had been awake for over 24 hours, but I've heard of instances of this happening to people on that stretch of road. Some people call it ghost, maybe a dream, or some kids playing some pranks on the people who passed through. I know that I'll never fall asleep parked on the side of the road again. Back when I delivered pizza in a small college town, I used to have to deliver to some pretty remote places. One weekend I was delivering to a house that was about a mile outside of our delivery range, but it was a slow night, and I was saving up tips for a trip, so I told my boss that I would do it. The house was near impossible to find. It was deep in the woods, and it was dark outside. The driveway was completely overgrown. There was very little cell service too, so my GPS wasn't functioning properly. I passed it about 4 times before seeing the hidden mailbox, which indicated the house. I got out of my car and I went to the front door. I knocked a few times, but there was no answer. It didn't look like there was any lights on in the house, and the window blinds were drawn, so it was hard to tell. I could clearly hear what sounded like someone running up and down the stairs. I thought it might be a dog at first, but there was no barking. After about a few minutes, this is when I began to feel something was off. I became extremely aware of how dark, quiet, and remote this place really was. I determined that this guy's tip wasn't worth it, and I decided to head back. I turned back to my car and I screamed, and I dropped the pizza. There was a kid, probably 12 or 13, sitting on the hood of my car. I had no earthly idea where he came from. He had on a light gray hoodie. Combined with the darkness, he looked like a specter. I picked up the pizza and I gathered myself. I yelled out asking if he lived there and ordered the pizza. The kid immediately jumped off the hood and he sprinted into the woods, away from the house. I got to my car and I was ready to get out of there. When I reversed out of the driveway, right before I pulled into the street, I saw the kid emerge from the woods again, and he stood in the driveway, watching me leave. I got back to the store and I told my boss what happened. He got angry at me, that I didn't make more of an attempt to deliver the pizza, but I talked him into calling the house to confirm the order. No one picked up after 4 attempts. My boss stopped accepting calls outside the delivery zone. Not because of danger to the drivers, but because of wasting the money of the company. This dude was a jerk. We never got a call from that house again for the remaining 2 months that I worked there. I used to work on a medical boat that visited villages along the Amazon River. My first week on the boat, I was sitting on the upper deck. I was all alone watching the stars, when out of the corner of my vision, I saw a floating white shape that was no more than 15 meters from the side of the boat. I got up to see what it was. It was dark, so my sight wasn't the best. As I got closer, I saw a decaying corpse dressed in all white hanging from a tree. Needless to say, I was terrified. I ran down to the crew quarters and I started freaking out. The rest of the crew responded. So you saw one of the hangers, right? Cool. Apparently it was a common practice for one of the tribes in the area to hang their honored dead in a tree for wildlife to reclaim. I just wish someone warned me beforehand. I worked as a security guard at an incinerator out in the west desert of Utah. I was unarmed, which made things worse. It was about a 45-minute drive out from either direction to get to the nearest bit of civilization. My shift was from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. I was the only person in the facility all night long. One night, while out on patrol, I was cautiously picking my way through the railcar holding that was part of the facility. I was trying to be quiet and to listen to anything out of sorts. I had no flashlight on. I was just softly stepping my way through the moonlight. I rounded a rail car and I literally came face to face with the muzzle of a random cow. The cow was shocked, as was I with this encounter, and let out a terrified screaming moo at the same time that I started screaming. I fell flat on my butt, and this cow jumped to the right. He slammed his head into a rail car. Then he went careening away from me, through the rail yard, hitting cars left and right. If I would have been armed, I would have emptied a clip into that cow, which I kind of felt bad about later. Also, there was a fox there that would sometimes hang out with me while I was doing my rounds. That little dude was chill. Thank you guys for joining me. This is stories that I found from Reddit about working in isolation. Some of them were pretty funny, so I decided to include those. Hope you guys liked it. I'm thinking I might do Florida Man next, so I look forward to having that ready for you. I'm going to give a special thanks to my patrons. Your help is greatly appreciated. They're able to hear all of these individually. Whenever I get one recorded or a set recorded, I like to take my time and put sound effects to everything. It gives me more time and freedom to get more of it done, so it does take a while for it all to get out, so I can make it into a compilation, but I really like the results myself and hope you guys do too. Well, I'm going to get off here and Again, thanks for listening, and until next time, this is Dallas, signing off.